Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay? My name is Franco Danesi. I'm a partner at Korelya Capital, which is a European venture capital firm. And I'm here today with my colleague, Fleur, who is the founder of Korelya Capital. And we are about to talk about an interesting topic, I think, at least for everybody who is in the investing business like ourselves, which is how Korelya Capital detects potential unicorn as part of the European startup ecosystem. But maybe before I give the word to Fleur, I'll just say a few words of introduction on Fleur. Fleur started her career as a high civil servant in France for many years. And in 2012, she was appointed as Minister for SME, Small and Medium Enterprise, Innovation and Digital, and was very much involved in the French tech initiative. So she's very much part of the creation of the tech ecosystem in France and broader in Europe. After several ministerial roles, she founded Korelya Capital in 2016. And without further delay, maybe Fleur, here's the first question for you. When you founded Korelya, how did you think about the technology opportunity in Europe?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Kita, for inviting us today in person. I must say, Franco, that we're very excited to have been able to travel to Seoul in these very challenging times, and I hope we can, come back more regularly to visit our friends here in Korea. So when I created the fund, actually, I had this idea that I had as a minister some years before, that in Europe, and it was the same in Asia outside China, it was still quite difficult to create big tech champions that could really compete with the American big tech giants or with the Chinese big tech giants. We have amazing ecosystems in Europe. We have amazing education systems. We have amazing engineers. We have amazing legacy industries. But for some reasons, it seemed difficult to scale up the businesses. It seemed okay to create some startups and some companies, but very difficult to take them to a new scale or a big scale that could make them potential competitors to big tech. So my idea was that I really wanted to commit and make some effort to really try to bridge this gap between Europe and the United States, or Europe and China, if we want to say, to really support the ecosystem and help create big tech businesses that would be able to scale. And how would we do that? I mean, it was not only a question of money, in my opinion. It was really a question also of mentoring the companies, bringing them to new markets, supporting them in their development. And so what I really wanted to create with Korelya Capital was a fund that would be a very hands-on, so very proactive fund, very close to founders, helping mature companies, so companies that had the potential to become regional champions, to grow their business, especially in Asia, because I think that we have a lot in common with Korea, between France and Korea, but there's a lot we can share, and there's a lot of synergies we can create between Europe and Asia, and I really wanted to leverage these synergies to create a new type of fund. I think a lot of funds are focusing on the American market to help the businesses develop on the American market, but I really wanted to create strong synergies with Asian partners.
Thank you, Fleur. And it's been 5 years since you started the firm. Were your assumptions sort of been proven right? I mean, how was your experience over the last 5 years been?
Well, I think so. At first, it was a sort of challenge because we were not sure that insisting on the Asian angle would be attractive for founders. Everybody seems to be super obsessed with the American market, and as soon as a company starts to grow, a lot of people, think that, okay, they're going to develop on the American market. But then I found that many European companies were very interested in the Asian market, were very interested in the Korean market, because in Korea you have amazing technology companies, big corporations, but also a vibrant ecosystem. So we found that even in very competitive rounds, so you know that now to invest in a startup, it's not really the VC that picks the startup, but it's more the startup that chooses the VC with whom they want to work. So we found that having this Asian angle and having maybe a very singular or original value proposition was a great help for Korelya Capital, was probably very differentiating and helped us win some deals that otherwise would have been very competitive and difficult to access. So I think now when you look at the portfolio that we managed to assemble, we've invested in 17 companies in all over Europe, in many different countries, not only in France. And we have a lot of unicorns. We have 7 unicorns, actually, which were not unicorns when we invested in them. So I think it's not only, of course, because of our investment that they've been successful, but I think developing the Asian angle has been a strong value driver for many companies. When I think, for example, of a company like De Vialet is a high-end audio company producing high-end speaker. When we invested in 2017, they were doing less than 5% of their turnover in Asia. And today, it's going to, probably this year, it's going to be more than 50%. So, you know, this Asian value proposition is really something that is actually a very strong value proposition. And so far, so good. The portfolio is doing super well, and we really want to continue developing this angle.
I think it's actually amazing what happens over the last 5 years in the markets in general in Europe. I mean, whichever way you measure it, whether it's, I mean, we're talking about unicorns, so I think 5 years ago we had about 17 unicorns. Now we have about 100 in Europe and growing. One can say is about valuation, but the reality is that the ecosystem that was created in, not just in London, but in Paris, in Berlin, in the Nordics, is really yielding more and more companies that have global potential. So, but if you sort of take a step back, why do you think that Europe has lagged behind the likes of US and China historically in creating large tech successes?
Well, I think there are many different explanations. The first one being maybe that, you know, Europe is a fragmented market. So when you think of Europe, although it's a huge opportunity as a market because the number of consumers is larger than the US and the gross domestic product, you know, when you consider the zone is almost equivalent. So you could think it's a huge market opportunity. But then you don't, you know, you cannot, as a company, you cannot address Europe as a whole market. It's the same as if we speak about Asia. Asia is not a single market. You have, you know, different countries with different cultures, with different consumption styles, with different regulations. And so, you know, when you're a startup based in Paris, for example, addressing the German market is almost as difficult as addressing the American market. So that's one of the first hurdles. It's not yet a single market. And so it's extremely costly for a company to address the whole market. So that's one of the first things. And then probably one of the other reasons was that maybe the governments also, it took them time to realize how important the support to entrepreneurship and the support to local ecosystem and to local financing was. Probably there was a moment where the capital was an issue. I remember when I was appointed as a minister in 2012, there was what we call the Valley of Death of financing. There was enough money probably for seed stages and early stages of the companies. But as soon as a company was going to raise more than 10 or 20 million euros, or 10 or 20 million dollars, then there was no French actor able to support the company in this journey. So that was really a big issue. So lack of capital, fragmented market. I would add maybe a mindset that was not really entrepreneurial and maybe a bit too domestic. I think now you see new generations of people who are less risk averse. I think the relationship to risk and the social perception of failure and risk taking has changed a lot over the past 10 years. I remember when I was a student at business school in the 90s, I think probably 80 to 90% of my class wanted to work for Arthur Andersen or for big consulting or audit, companies, which sounds a bit strange and exotic maybe today. Nobody wanted to create his own company. And today, if you take the same class in the same business school, probably you have 30, 40% of the students who want to create their own business. So I think the relationship to entrepreneurship has changed a lot and the mindset has changed. And also probably the entrepreneurs are more ambitious and they think global and international from scratch, which was maybe not the case a couple of years ago. So they have a more global mindset, I would say. So local ecosystem that have been supported by the local governments, more entrepreneurial mindset, more financing, probably more interest also from international investors. And you see that nowadays a lot of capital comes from the United States to fund the unicorns that we have in Europe. So I think the whole momentum has evolved toward a better environment for startup creation and development. And then we collect the fruits of that evolution now. And I think it's the beginning. I'm very optimistic for the future.
Oh, absolutely. I think if you look at some of the stats today, we got about 100 unicorns, and what's fascinating to me is that they are from 17 different European countries. So it's not a phenomenon that is concentrated in one or two hubs. It's actually taken on across Europe. If you go back 5-10 years ago, most of unicorns in Europe were actually born in the Nordics. The likes of Spotify, Klarna, big success today, Skype. And the reason for that is the Swedish government promoted innovation very, very heavily, created generation of entrepreneurs that actually, started their own companies, ideas generated ideas. And I think what's happened in Sweden has now sort of taken on in sort of the broader continent. So that's so if you had to point to kind of, there's a point in time when there's this trigger, this flywheel that starts really spinning fast. I mean, where would that be in your mind? If you take, I don't know, the French example that maybe you're closer to, where would that be?
I would say when I was in office, of course. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. But honestly, I have the feeling that in the 2010s, really, there was this change of mindset, and we did a lot to create this ecosystem of this network effects you were mentioning. I think it's very important when you look at we call it sometimes the mafia. So whenever a company is very successful, and then some people who had shares from this company that goes public, then they can, get some money, and then with that money they create a new venture, and then it creates, by this sort of network effect, it creates a lot of new businesses, and some of them are very successful. It's what happened with Skype, it's what happened with Spotify, and in other ecosystems, like in France, you start to have this effect also now with people from BlaBlaCar, for example, which is this car sharing company. A lot of people from BlaBlaCar are now creating their own business. So you see generations of entrepreneurs. You have guys in their 50s who have been successful and reinvested in the ecosystem, and now guys in their 40s and now in their 30s. And it's very nice to create this virtuous circle where you don't only reinvest capital and money, but also there's mentoring, there's meetups where these people share their experience, they work as role models for other younger generations. So it's very important. And you see that in many different countries. We have this investment, for example, in Estonia. And Estonia is such a tiny country. I think the population is like 2 million people. So it's a very tiny country, but they have a proportion of a ratio of unicorns per inhabitant that is totally crazy. And actually, a lot of people, worked with Skype and then relocated to Tallinn and then started businesses. And we have this company, amazing company that is Bolt. We are very proud to support Bolt because Bolt is the only European competitor to Uber in the mobility space, so in the ride-hailing space. It's a very prominent company doing very well globally, so they managed to expand internationally, and the founder is under 30. So is this generation of people who are super ambitious, super good in execution, and no matter if they are born in a country that is very with a small market, they think global, and they have this ability to project themselves outside the borders. So I think creating this. I mean, the governments cannot do everything. And I see a lot of similarities between what's happening now in Korea with the same phenomenon, of generations of entrepreneurs who play a big role in creating, the ecosystem. People from Kakao, people from Naver, people from Nexon, the gaming industry. You see a generation of founders, and then the next generation is Coupang, and then the next generation is Woowa Brothers and TOS, etc. So I think this effect of waves of innovation is super important, and it's good if the governments are here to promote innovation and encourage innovation. But the most critical part is played by the entrepreneurs themselves. So you need to create the environment where they will feel socially and economically interesting to be entrepreneurs and to be ambitious.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And let's talk maybe a little bit about sectors. I mean, if you look at where the unicorns are today, they're actually sort of quite widespread in a number of sectors. I mean, how do you think about the sectors that are really sort of ripe to produce sort of the next unicorns? How do you think about it as you think about new investments?
It's, of course, always very difficult to answer that question because it's a bit, the crystal ball. But what I find very interesting is that there were some signals, or what you could call, low signals before the COVID crisis, evolutions, trends of consumption that have been strongly reinforced by the COVID crisis. I'm thinking of a sector that we found very interesting, which was like in e-commerce, like the C2C business or the second-hand business. We felt that it was a growing trend because it was, at the crossroad between ESG concerns, and the previous session was a lot about ESG, so really having a better environmental footprint, being more responsible in the way we consume, and also being, a bit savvy, paying attention to the budget we allocate to for example, stuff and fashion or objects that we put in our homes. So I think this was a growing trend and very strongly, I think, anchored in the mindset of the millennials. They don't want to consume fast fashion. They want, they want to have a more responsible approach to consumption. But then with the COVID crisis, I think people thought a lot about, the consumption society. They thought a lot about budget allocation. They thought a lot about being stuck at home and having to use, shop online, basically. So I think what we witnessed is that this C2C business, for example, second-hand business, we invested in Vestiaire Collective, which is a high-end fashion, luxury fashion, second-hand platform, very successful in France. It did super well during the crisis because a lot of people, felt attracted to this kind of model. So I think this, trends where you can find some ESG or sustainable approach and a market trend that was existing before are probably will be very successful in the years to come. This could apply also to food tech. I mean, we didn't have any investment. We didn't make an investment in food tech in our portfolio. But I think the way people eat or relate to food is changing a lot as well. Not only because a lot of people are becoming flexitarian or vegetarian or vegan, but also because of sustainability concerns. We feel that we should eat less meat, and probably the new proteins that are being developed will continue to develop and have very interesting addressable markets. So I think, if you speak from a macro perspective, at the junction between environment and sustainability concerns and tech trends that were starting to develop before, you will find probably unicorns in the years to come. That's just one example, but doesn't mean that fintech or health tech, etc. But I think this is an interesting development during the COVID crisis.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I mean, it almost goes beyond sectors, and it goes into really thinking about how technology can change the way we live our lives, whether it's the food we eat, whether it's the way we move around, whether it's the way we dress and buy, clothes or goods. That's really the way we sort of think about it, and I absolutely agree with that. But you said before that, Korelya obviously invests before companies become unicorns, right? Hopefully we're not going to be the one making them unicorn with our funding round. So as you think about these companies, what are the traits that you look at to spot or detect, like the title of our session says, a potential unicorn?
I think we would look at, we look at mature companies. So it's not companies that have a product market fit risk, or, they're beyond this kind of period. So we would really look at the fact that they address a market or propose a solution to, a question or a problem that is really key. You were saying that technology solves some or change the way we live, we work, we interact with others, we access to culture. So we would probably be very interested in companies that provide a sustainable and scalable answer to this kind of new problems that people have in their everyday lives. And then probably what is very useful, we would look at KPIs, of course, the type of growth of revenues and the road to profitability, which is more classical. But I would say that something very important also for us is the quality of the team, because what we realize when we invest in companies at that stage is that the execution is so key that sometimes the management that was fit to bring the company from 0 to 10 is not the same management team that will bring the company from 10 to 100 or from 10 to 1,000. So sometimes you need to make sure that the management grows at the same pace as the KPIs or the numbers, and that the management is really fit to scale the company, which is the most difficult part to address because it's not financial, it's not in the Excel sheet, it's not, it's difficult to modelize, but it's really something where experience, I think, is very important, because when you have seen many, many teams, some have failed, some have been successful, then you get probably the intuition of who is going to be the right team to bring the company to new skies. So I think, past the financial analysis, what is very interesting in our job is really this human and personal aspect of betting on a team and making trying to support them and make sure that they are the right person to bring the company to the top.
Yes, no, I agree with that. I think the next topic I wanted to touch upon is, and I think is part of your investment thesis. It's about companies that have global potentials, that have the ability to scale internationally, and where Asia is ideally a big opportunity for them. Now, can you maybe talk a little bit about one point that you made before? Everybody, in Europe, and I'm sure other parts of the world, as they think about going abroad, the US is typically next on the list. How do you think about Asia? How do you think about selling the Asia opportunity to European founders?
Well, I think the Asian market is very, it can be very, of course it depends on the product and what you're selling, but it can be very, very attractive because the populations are very techy, very geek. So there's a strong adoption of telecom, smartphones, etc. So there's a market that is very interesting for applications, tech products, etc. And because also the US is such a competitive market with a lot of strong local champions, sometimes it can be very, it can be very, very difficult for a European business to become successful on the American market. And if you think of it, there are not so many examples of European companies that have really managed to become dominant or to have a prominent position on the American market. It's very rare. So I think trying to create this bridge with the Asian market was a very strong bet, as I said at the beginning of the talk. But I think it's proving quite successful. But there's not one way to deal with it. Actually, what we're trying to do at Korelya is we're trying to create these synergies 3 different ways. So one way can be, for example, a company needs to find new markets. So then it's the easiest situation. We will help the company find local partners, retailers, do marketing, it's market access. The second one would be a company might not be interested in addressing directly the Asian market immediately, but might be interested in finding some financial partners, so investors, for example. And that's something we did for Glovo. Glovo is a last mile delivery, a sort of Wua brother, in Spain. Last mile delivery company in Spain, quite young, but very successful. And we brought Korean investors in their cap table because they were interested in having, a foot in Asia through an investment. So that's capital can be a second type of synergy. And the third type of synergy can be technology, partnership, technological partnership. That's something we're developing right now with Wallapop. Wallapop is a platform, a second-hand mobile-first platform in Spain. And we are developing very strong synergies to use Asian technology and apply it to Wallapop to help them gain a few years of development. It would have meant for them maybe 4 or 5 years of R&D. And instead, we have some technology provided by Naver. And it's very interesting, to be able to create this kind of cooperations. So these 3 types of synergies actually depend a lot on the type of company we're invested in. And we have a sort of tailor-made service for each portfolio company. But our goal is the next phase of Korelya Capital would be to do the same for Asian businesses. So to help, thanks to our network, thanks to our know-how and the diversity of our team in Paris, would be to start investing in Korean businesses and help them do the same, as we do for the French businesses here in Korea, do the same in Europe. So for companies who have an interest in finding new markets in Europe, or finding financial partners, or maybe finding some technological cooperations, or whatever other cooperations with French partners, I think it would be very interesting to be able to deploy that playbook in a reverse way a couple of years from now. So the master plan, if you wish, is really to develop this bridge in the 2 ways, from Asia to Europe and from Europe to Asia. And I don't think that many investment funds have worked on this kind of strategy. And I'm sure that it can prove very, very successful, very fruitful, and also develop cooperations between our 2 regions, which I like as a principle.
Thank you. Maybe if we look at the other way around, obviously it's easy to identify a unicorn when the company has become so. But there's also many companies that don't make it to unicorn status. What would you think are the main factors for mistakes to be avoided by founders and teams as they think about building large companies?
Well, as I was saying earlier, I think really the alchemy or the composition of the team is really key, because you see so many failures that are adventures that stop very brutally because the founders don't get along together anymore, or they split, or they want to do some liquidity, quite early. So I think, one of the issues that we have in France, and maybe it's the same in Korea, is why do founders sell so early? Why don't they go all the way to IPO for dozens of billions of euro or dollars? And it's true that it requires, some vision and some strong ambition to be able to refuse an offer, an M&A offer by a big corporate when you have worked for maybe 7 to 10 years in your company, allocated a lot of personal time to it, a lot of effort. Sometimes, it's very difficult to be an entrepreneur. So we have this issue, why can't we build very strong success stories? And so I think, to find the people who have the potential to become unique or to create unicorns, you need to identify the sort of sparkle, in this entrepreneur. You understand from him that he will want to bring the company really to the edge or to the summit. So as I was saying, it's very difficult because it's not something that is scientific. You cannot really, read it in the numbers. You can, of course, see the way execution has been performed until the moment where you are supposed to invest. But it requires really a strong personal and human appreciation. So I would say that the interesting thing is this job is that aside from the financial due diligence that you will perform, technical due diligence that you will perform to make sure that the product, answers a real problem, as we said before, I think the biggest and the most critical bet that you need to make when you make an investment is really to assess the execution capacity or the execution skills of the leaders in the company, and that's what makes it. That's what it's called venture capital, right? Because it's it's really a risk that we are taking, but it's the beauty of this job, I think.
No, absolutely, and also the skills required to be successful at various stages as companies grow change. When the company is in early stages, developing the product, finding the product market fit is very critical. As the company developed into becoming a global leader, the ability to execute across countries, internationalizing the team, building a bigger team around, the core team, it becomes more critical. So you're absolutely right. Talent is the key factor. I think there's another point, at least in my experience, which is counterintuitive sometimes. Sometimes companies, when they have a lot of capital available, they tend to lose their focus. They tend to, try and do too many things at the same time. So, oftentimes I found that if you lose focus on what is your end objective, where is it that you want to go and what you want to build, and you start going into many, many directions just because you have the money to do so, that typically does not lead to success. So, so maybe that's another factor that is important. I don't know what you.
Yeah, I totally agree, and it's true that on the first point, the management sometimes is not the same management required for the first phases of the company and for the scaling of the company. It's true, and I mean we've been confronted to that situation a couple of times where we had to change the management along the way because we realized that we needed some other skill sets to take the company in the next phase, which is always a bit complicated, of course, because sometimes you need the founders to take a step back, and it's never a very easy moment. But what I find interesting, I was speaking to founders recently, so a guy in his 30s, early 30s, who was very young, but quite successful already. And we had this discussion about that. So I told him, what if you realize that you're not the right person to bring your company to the next phase? And he said, I'm being coached, and he was, mentored and coached by professional coaches. But I think I did this mental work on myself, to distantiate myself emotionally from my business. So it's my creation, but it's not like my baby or something. So he managed to have a, very objective relationship to his business. And he says it's really something that I need to do, because if I realize that I'm not the right person to take the company to the next phase, I will step back and I will, try to find the best CEO for this new phase of development of the company. And I think, the guy who at 32 has already factored in that he might have to step down because he's not the right person to take the company to the next phase. I think it's very mature. And it's probably not very easy psychologically because it's still your baby, when it's your venture. But I thought it was really a good sign of, maturity. And he understood something that a lot of entrepreneurs should have in mind, which is, you need to really assemble the best team. And sometimes you're not part of the best team anymore. So, yeah, I think it's a very important point.
Thank you. Maybe going back to your experience with Korelya and building Korelya, you seem to have developed a very strong relationship with a company that everybody knows in Korea, which is Naver. What are your plans? Can you sort of go into a little more detail on that, and particularly what are your plans going forward with Naver?
Yeah, we were so lucky to have this amazing relationship with Naver. Even though the way we, thought of this investment, of the creation of Korelya, was really to create a plain vanilla investment fund, which means that we are independent. We're not a corporate venture fund, so we make an investment decision totally independently from Naver. But of course, having Naver as a partner is super meaningful for many companies. I was mentioning earlier this big Spanish company Wallapop. Being able to develop a dialogue, whether that be from a technology or from a capital point of view, with a partner like Naver is really key. But now it was, we're raising a second fund, and the second fund, of course, we keep this very strong relationship with Naver, but it was agreed from the beginning that we would diversify the LP base. So we are creating also new relationships with investors. None of them might be as strategic, maybe as the one with Naver, but we're still, coming closer to a more traditional VC model. But of course, this, the impact of being able to access a strong network in Asia for our portfolio companies has proven very useful in the past years. I was mentioning De Vialet, being able to have good relationships with retailers here, or to start a dialogue with Samsung or with LG or with Hyundai is super important for companies who might have cooperation opportunities with this kind of players. So I think, when I think of the long term, and it was also the plan that we had from the beginning, I wish we could also do the same for Korean companies wanting to develop in Europe. I think for companies who have an interest in meeting with potential partners in the creative industries, in the lifestyle industries. We have super amazing companies in France, LVMH, Kering. We have a lot of companies in the creative industry. We have a great cinema. We have this in common, I think, with Korea. Very strong legacy industries, very strong skills in the content, media content, creative industries. So I think developing these cooperations might be a very good asset in the years to come. That's something I'm quite optimistic about as well.
Thank you. Maybe Fleur, one last question before we leave maybe room for the audience to ask you a few questions. But as you think about the European tech opportunity, how would you think that's an opportunity for Korean investors?
I think it's a great opportunity right now because for many different reasons, some of them might be geopolitical, because I think, and if I restrict my speech to Korea, I think there's a huge opportunity right now for Korea because at the time when the geopolitical situation with China, between China and the US, was a bit tense. It's less the case now, but we feel that it's going to be structuring the geopolitical situation in the years to come, this sort of competition between the Chinese model and the Western model. So this creates, of course, tension in the supply chain, tension in the commercial relationship between the countries. And in that case, Europe could appear as a very neutral, or at least a sort of safe haven for investors, because the political situation is quite, is very steady. The environment is not always 100% predictable as far as regulation or tax is concerned, but still it's a very safe environment to do business. And what I would say in the tech area, you've mentioned that the past 5 years have seen the creation of 100+ unicorns in Europe in 17 different countries. So it's really, a space where the tech sector is really booming. And when you look at the valuation, of course, you start to see crazy things, but not as crazy as in the US. And probably from a valuation point of view, there is still a lot of very interesting opportunities in Europe where you can find very good companies at reasonable valuations, which, when you look at the American market, is not so easy anymore. So I think the combination between the political aspect, the environment, the doing business environment, where a lot of progress has been made over the past years. I mean, all the countries, and especially France, and I know it for sure, have made a lot of efforts to welcome foreign investment and foreign businesses. Plus the fact that the tech ecosystem is booming, full of opportunities, and with, reasonable valuations. I think this creates a very favorable environment for Asian investors in Europe.
Great. Well, thank you, Fleur. Before we open to the audience, do you want to make any final remarks?
No, I mean, I think we've covered quite a lot. Thanks, Franco, for moderating. No, as I said, really, we started this journey 4 years ago, almost 5 years ago, with a strong bet on this French, Korean, or Euro-Asian synergies. But I think up to now, whether that be, when I look at the portfolio of Korelya, which has been very resilient during the crisis, but which is also performing super well. When I look at the way we've helped businesses set a foot in Asia and create business, create relationship, create network, and create also value, I'm really very optimistic about the ability that we have in the future to continue proving the force and the strength of that model. And I'm really looking forward to start investing in Korea. It's a new market for us, and we will do it with partners. I think we will mainly co-invest in the first years with local VCs, but we're looking forward to try to develop and to use this know-how and this network that we have in Europe to foster the Korean businesses. So that's the next step, but I hope that next year, maybe when I come to NextRise, we will already have stories to tell about us helping Korean businesses.
Fantastic. I don't know if we have any time for questions from the audience. Okay, that doesn't seem to be. Maybe I'll ask one more question if that's all right. It's a question on valuations. I mean, we touched upon it, and you're right that maybe Europe is not at the top of the range, so to speak, when it comes to valuation. But it's clear that we have seen recently some extremely high price rounds in the tech space. Are all these companies overvalued in your view? What should we make of it?
But I think it's really the continuation of the trend that has hit the United States before it hit Europe. So I think it's a sort of overreaction maybe of some investors, and also maybe the existence of very, very deep pocket players, you know, who have the ability to put billions on the table for companies that have not a proven profitability. So I think it's, you know, probably something that is here to last a bit. Everybody is sort of expecting a correction in the months or years to come, but we don't see it really coming. So I think, you know, we'll see. It's very difficult for me to predict if there's a bubble and that the bubble will explode, or if it's a sort of structuring trend where overvaluation will be sort of norm in some sectors. But definitely, I think there are some opportunities. There are now some big players who are able to put a lot of money to acquire companies or to create, you know, the valuation of some businesses. So I think we should try to seize the opportunity and use it in the right way, not to create a strong distortion between, or a strong gap between the real economy and the tech, you know, and the tech sector, because this is always the sign of a bubble, that the bubble is going to burst. But, you know, let's try to be smart and to sort of outsmart this market trend and to use it to make, to create good opportunities.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, could you please wrap up the session? So it's time to wrap up this session. Okay. 자, 이렇게 저희 이번 세션 마무리하도록 하겠습니다. 다시 한번 박수 부탁드리겠습니다. Thank you very much for your discussion and session.